Welcome to the July's Integrative Conservation webinar series. Today we have a very, very interesting seminar. But before that, let me do a bit of housekeeping. You know that these webinars happen every month, and these are organized by Integrative Conservation, a new journal published by Sishombana Tropical Botanical Garden in collaboration with Wiley. You can find these webinars the first Tuesday of every month, normally at 4:30 p.m. Beijing time. And in the next couple of months, we'll have interesting presentations by Nigel Stork from Australia in August, and by Alessio Terci from the European Commission in September. Also, I want to remind everyone that Integrative Conservation is very keen on getting submissions on papers from different conservation topics. As the journal name says, it's an integrative approach to conservation, so we very much welcome papers addressing social aspects of conservation, also very applied aspects of conservation, including policy and practice. So then if you have a manuscript and you're looking for a journal to publish on conservation, please consider Integrative Conservation. And we are currently having a special issue on human-wildlife conflicts. So then the call for papers is already open. The deadline for submission is mid-August. If you work on human-wildlife conflict and coexistence, please consider submitting your papers to Integrative Conservation. And without any further ado, let's go to today's webinar. Today we have Professor Tien Ming Lee from Sun Yat-sen University, who will be talking to us about the growing disparity in global conservation research capacity and its impact on biodiversity conservation, a very, very interesting and important topic for conservation. A brief introduction to Tien Ming. As I said, he's professor at the School of Ecology and Sun Yat-sen, and he's also a PI at the State Lab of Biological Control. Besides Sun Yat-sen, he has spent time in many countries. He's originally from Singapore, has spent time in the National University of Singapore, has spent time in UC, University of California, San Diego, at Yale University, at Columbia University, and Oxford. So he has a wide range of experiences in top academic institutions. He has also been working in the private sector for a while, so then he has not only academic experience, but also some practical professional experience. He has published over 80 scientific papers in the leading journals, including Nature, Science, Nature Climate Change, Nature Sustainability, Nature Ecology and Evolution, One Earth, and many others. He's also in the editorial board of many of the leading conservation journals. And his research interest is mainly in conservation science, socioecological systems, climate change, global change, sustainable resource management, sustainable consumption, and low carbon lifestyle. So without any further ado, Tien Ming, please feel free to share your screen, and thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you. Can people hear me? Okay,
yes,
good.
Yeah.
I see that. Many thanks to Ahimsa. Let me just share my screen before. Okay, can people see? Takes a while, I think. Okay. All right, people can see, right? Okay. Okay, let me see if I can flip this. All right, I can. Okay. So first and foremost, many thanks to Ahimsa for inviting me to this wonderful series of integrative conservation webinar. And you know, I didn't realize that it's a once a month seminar, so I'm honored to be the July speaker. I think last month we had someone that I also know, I don't know, it could be James Watson or before that. Anyway, I think it's a real honor to actually come today and talk about a bit of research that we did, or rather me and my collaborators actually did I think it's an interesting story. The title is actually based on a research paper we recently published in One Earth, which is one of Cell's journal, I think. It's quite interesting in our opinion, partly because it speaks about the importance of conservation research capacity, something that not too long ago, actually, in this country, China, we actually struggled a little bit, maybe like 30 years ago. So this is really also a story about our the growth of research capacity, especially in conservation in China. And we wanted to actually see how the whole growth in terms of the capacity to do conservation research in China, how it actually, you could look at it globally to look at why this is important and what the current trend looks like. Because without broad global research capacity for many countries, especially those that are rich in biodiversity, it is really challenging or difficult, in essence, to protect what we have on this planet. So today's talk is about this, and I think Himza has already did a really brief introduction, and this is my email address for people who are interested to get in touch at the end of the talk. Feel free to send me drop me a line. I'm currently at Sun Yat-sen University in Guangzhou as well as Shenzhen. I'm in the new School of Ecology. The story goes back to, like I said, quite long ago, maybe about 14 years ago, in 2009. Although I'm Chinese by race, right? And my grandparents comes from China. I'm actually born a Singaporean and spent all my adulthood growing up in Singapore. So as somebody who looks really Chinese and know a little bit of, or know the Chinese culture, I speak the Chinese language, I'm always fascinated by China as a country. It wasn't until 2009 when I came to the country, to Beijing, to attend the 23rd annual meeting of the ICCB, the International Congress for Conservation Biology. It is the first time I remember that I visited Beijing, and it was my first time meeting fellow professionals doing conservation in China. I remember it was a really interesting experience, and this was the first time I sort of flirted with the idea of actually coming to China to work. Obviously, what do I know, right? It became pretty clear that 2017 I had the chance to come to Sun Yat-sen University, so I jumped at it. At that time, I was fascinated by the idea of ecological civilization, what it means, and what we can do from our discipline, from the perspective of conservation science. Like how exactly could we use what we know from the ecological, social sciences, how we could take a very interdisciplinary and different approach to promote conservation. So in our slightly broader group, so we sort of have 3 key members that form the conservation science group, and we have Professor Fan Pengfei. Pengfei actually, maybe many of the my Chinese colleague actually knows him. He's like the one of the key guy working on gibbons research, and we have another very key person, which is Professor Liu Yang. Liu Yang actually works on birds, and I think many people that know birds know him. So it was a really good experience, or really good incentive to be working with two of the I would say emerging young, although this was like 6-7 years ago. So now we are not that young anymore. We are like probably approaching middle age. At least I know I'm middle age now. So together we started thinking.
Okay, I think we briefly lost Tien Ming.
I'm back. Can you hear me?
We get you.
Okay. All right. So my slides, you can still see my slides?
No, right now.
Okay.
We
hang on.
you can share again.
1 second. Okay. Okay. You could see now. You should be able to see now. All right. Okay. Can you? All right. Okay. So I'll keep going. So I mean, being part of a group, we try to think of things to do. And I think one of the questions that we got really interested in is, compared to some time ago, how exactly are we doing, at least in terms of China? So all this leads to the paper that I eventually will talk about, but this is a process. All good research actually comes from a string of very interesting research questions or observations that we actually see along the way. So this was sort of during COVID time when we were just thinking about this question, and of course we were all at home, and we were thinking about what to do, what we could do to conservation, and that was a really productive time, I guess, fortunately. So we had the chance to actually think about how. I think the question that we really were interested is that we had this really grand vision of ecological civilization, and we had this Belt Road Initiative in pushed forward by China, and China has this really grand biodiversity governance strategy. The problem or the question that we actually had was, do we actually have the research capacity to do something this grand, right? So this was always the question. So we wanted to see if we could do it, right? And if we could, how else we could improve, right? And if we couldn't, then what are the issues or barriers that we actually need to do to overcome to do it? So this was an idea that we actually had. So Peng Fei, Liu Yang, a postdoc, Yang Li, and myself, we came up with this idea of, why don't we just look at, if we actually have enough manpower, enough expertise to protect the vertebrate diversity, vertebrates in China, just for instance. It's a very, very simple test case. So we ended up asking our contacts, whoever that we know, to actually compile a list of people who have done vertebrate research ever in China. And the requirement is that they actually have to be around in an institute right now. They may not still do research on vertebrate conservation, but that doesn't matter, right? As long as they were trained in that area. So that would be the capacity that we have. Right. So we wanted to evaluate that. And this was a simple exercise that we went around getting name lists. We wanted to know when these people were born, for example, their age. We wanted to know where they are now, where they were trained. So we started to put together a database, and we started to map where everybody is. Right. And you could see that this is really a network of all those scientists who work on vertebrate research, vertebrate conservation to begin with, and where they are. For example, my host right now, XTBG, right, is way at the bottom, and you can see the little circle down here. that says XTBG, right? XTBG. So XTBG had people trained in vertebrate conservation, right? And basically the color looks at the number of people. The color represents the number of people. The light blue or blue is actually low number, and then red is normally red is a bright red is a high number, right? So then we also have different positions, right? You can see that the size of the bubble actually tells you how many people are trained. For example, IOZ here, which is Institute of Zoology in Beijing. KIZ is the Kunming Institute of Zoology. And you have, BNU, which is Beijing Normal, and of course, SYSU, which is where I'm based at. So we do have across the country, many different people at different institutions. And the lines actually connect institutions to institutions. It actually shows the transfer between them, right? It shows the transfer between them. For instance, we have people from IOZ who went to Beijing Forestry University, or people who went to CIB, Chengdu Institute of Biology. So we have a flow of people going everywhere. The color actually tells us also a bit of the amount of academic inbreeding that's happening. Why is academic inbreeding something that we are interested in? We see it as more like an issue, like inbreeding in conservation as an issue. Here it's actually very broadly defined. The idea here is that we hope to see a much freer exchange or flow of talent or people who do research on vertebrate conservation all across the country, right? But yet what we see is that in some university, we do see a very high retention of people with PhDs. Many of them remain in their PhD institute to continue their postdocs and eventually take up faculty position, which is quite common. Not necessarily good, but it's common, right? And it's quite common in some of the other institutions that we see. So the point here is that we are seeing this trend where the first thing is that we don't have too many people around to do vertebrate conservation, definitely not enough to support the grand goals that actually China has. So we really need to train more, right? But the problem, as we saw, as many of our listeners actually know, are aware of, is that, we have this growing problem where, based on the incentive, it's very incentive driven. So we train a lot of people who are interested in vertebrate conservation, but over time they tend to move into, say, genomic research or research that would allow them to publish high impact papers, probably in the cell and biology sector or in those streams. So we tend to see an outflow of talents that were originally trained but now left to do some other research. So then the actual biodiversity governance, or actually people doing conservation or people doing field work, the way that would actually promote field conservation, for instance, the way that would say promote the actual protection of biodiversity outside or in the wild, they tend to start to get lesser over time. Right, so there's a lot of perverse incentive that actually happen due to big policy changes, and that is necessary. Don't get me wrong, that is actually quite necessary. But the problem is that we are actually reacting to the policy, which in this particular evaluation sort of like goes against or wouldn't be able to sort of support the need for a lot of talent to get the whole Belt Road Initiative, biodiversity protection going, or to get enough people to be involved in the global conservation program, as we now see the importance of doing. And China actually needs to play a stronger and a leading role. So we are lacking all this. I think the most interesting thing we actually found was that we have a growing number of younger folks who are leaving, who are not retained or not not staying back to do vertebrate conservation per se, right? They are actually leaving to do some other different kinds of research. So that's a shame, because so much time is being spent and resources devoted to train them, but yet they don't stay to do the research that we're trained to do. So we are seeing that pattern, and of course we are seeing the inbreeding problem that I sort of highlighted earlier. But the point here is that we are actually we are training lesser and lesser vertebrate conservation scientists. As you can see, we have this hum shape. This is people who are we have people as old as 1958, and people the year that the PhD was awarded, not the age, the year that it was awarded, and we can see that there is actually a decreasing number. Sort of like interestingly, the number actually peaked around 2008. So after which the trend starts to go negative, go south. And so we wanted to see when we actually compare this to what goes on in UK and US, how does actually China measure up? I think in general, we are seeing the numbers. I mean, the numbers are roughly there. I mean, we try our very best to get data from UK and USA on websites, right? So we see that the numbers are actually quite comparable, but in general, I think we still are on the lower side. China is still on the lower side. Even though the number of papers they are quite even. The number of conservation-related papers per vertebrate conservation scientist, which is this plot right here. And I think in terms of number of citations, we are way behind. In other words, we have relatively quite junior scientists, so they are not really matching up to the conservation research scientists working on vertebrates in both UK and USA. So in itself, you can see that the China pool of talent, essentially, or the conservation research capacity, especially on vertebrate conservation, is really lacking, right? So in the paper that has been published or was published in 2020 in Nature, Ecology and Evolution, we had a few proposals, we had a few suggestions, a few ideas, right? Both at the global level, right? At the regional level as well as the national level. And this was before the COP15, right? This was before the COP15, which was in 2021. So this came before that. So we had the whole idea that, okay, perhaps this shortfall is not only in China. I mean, it could be everywhere, right? It could be everywhere. It could be in any non or underdeveloped or developing country. So we wanted to see, essentially wanted to start to evaluate this global conservation research capacity, which is the idea for the next paper. And something amazing, I would say, happened. Something that's actually quite important happened. And this is actually the CBD COP15. This was in Kunming 2021 in the midst of COVID. Something was, I would say, quite incredible for both the city of Kunming as well as the country in itself. There is now officially, globally, people start to sort of understand the whole idea of 生态文明, which is really ecological civilization. We start to push forward the idea of biodiversity conservation, as well as the idea of building an ecologically civilized society, right? So this was the main idea, and this was sort of broadcast to the entire world during Kunming. After the COP15 part 1, which was in Kunming, the other part was then moved to Montreal in Canada. I think it was December last year, around December last year. During that time, the Kunming-Montreal Protocol essentially had a few agreements, right? It came out with the whole GBF, or what is now known as the Global Biodiversity Framework. In that, there are two visions, right? One vision and the vision and missions, right? We have the 2050 vision and the 2030 mission. And in the 2030 mission, we also have multiple goals and multiple targets. Essentially, we have about 23 targets. And this is the list of the target. And this is a paper that was written by David Obura and colleagues. This was also part of the series of papers that was published, I think in the same issue as ours, in One Earth, I think a few months ago. And they sort of outlined, how this 23 targets sort of overlay or overlaps with the SDG Sustainable Development Goals, which there are about 17 of them. So they did a really good job in synthesizing how the targets and the SDGs actually intercept. So what I want to sort of bring your attention to is really T20, which is capacity building and transfer, I think. Yeah, capacity, technology, and transfer right here, right? I don't know if you can actually see my my little mouse moving, but the point here is that there is a really important, a huge need essentially to strengthen this capacity building and development. We need to sort of make this access or make this more accessible to the developing countries. We need to have more south to south transfer, north to south transfer, and so on and so forth. The idea here is really to promote and strengthen scientific research and monitoring capacities among the nations, particularly the developing countries. So countries that really lack all this expertise, these people, as well as technology and resources to do conservation. So that is how we came up with the whole idea that, okay, let's do assessment, let's do evaluation, right? Let's try to see whether this conservation research capacity, what is the trend like, what is the state like, and how the having it or having without it actually impact our conservation efforts. So this was something that we actually did, was published in February this year. So idea here, the story, the backstory we have already talked about, right? Really is to evaluate whether there is what the trend is in terms of the research capacity. So we wanted to see for every country where we are in the last 20 years. We know that it's actually very critical. So we wanted to know if every country actually has the ability or the capacity to do research, to do not just research, but to actually support biodiversity conservation. The assumption here is that research actually helps and promote biodiversity conservation. The question is, do we have enough, right? And how does it actually affect the actual protection? So in about 2004, Maurizio Icarino, my guess is that he's an Italian. So he actually, came up with the idea, or rather started to talk about this idea that, the developing countries really cannot solely or forever rely on industrialized world or the Western civilization or many of those developed countries to do research, right? They need to have their they need to find a way to have their own solutions, because they will have a different set of problems, right? So he started articulating the idea of mastering science in the South. And in 2005, right before we actually, before the 2009 meeting in Beijing, there is actually this whole issue in the Society for Conservation that talks about, capacity building and practice in a globalized world. The problem is that 17 years later, which is last year, this year, we still don't have a good sense how the status and trend, what the status and trends of this CRC, which is conservation research capacity in short, what the status and trends are. So this is actually our main objective for our paper. It's actually very, very simple approach. Most people know. I assume that most people in the audience, they probably have published at least one paper or hope to publish one paper, right? And all your scientific papers, essentially, if you do conservation and publish in conservation journals, you will be in our database, which is nice. So in the last 20 years, what we did, of course, we only looked at papers that are published after 2000. So assuming, we're looking at the trend in the last 20 years. We went through a lot of papers. Probably analyzed nearly 180,000 papers from major conservation journals, and we came up with 6 important indicators of CRC. Ones that would allow us to sort of measure their change or monitor their change for roughly 193 United Nations member countries. I will go through them very quickly. The idea here is that, okay, we looked at 6 aspects of CRC. One is publication, the number of publication that a country has. And we looked at the number of first authored publication that the country actually have. Here, the first author has to be based at a country. For example, for example, if I publish my paper as a first author, my paper, which is done, say, for example, I published in 2018, which is after I come to China and affiliated with SYSU. So then it becomes my paper count towards a paper in China, right? So this is how we looked at first author publication. Local publication here means that the publication counts for that country as long as there are authors affiliated with that country, right? So again, my paper actually counts in this local publication. Publication on-site actually means that publication counts for that country if it was carried out within a country, regardless of the origin of the author affiliation. In other words, it could be very possible that a paper in China, for example, right, or any other country, for example, do not have any affiliation with that country on it. So it's possible, maybe not in China anymore. I don't know. We didn't really look at the data very carefully to that extent, but I'm sure in many other countries, many other developing countries, we still see that trend, right? Of course, whenever we have a collaboration, we tend to want to, it will be really good if we could have local authors participate in it. And we have been seeing that trend, or people are getting more and more aware that we need to get local participants or local authors, local scientists to be part of a scientific publication. Of course, the next point here, next indicator, the 5th one is collaborating country. So we basically listed the number of countries that collaborates with that country, where the where the publication sort of originates. So you could have multiple countries, or you can have a single country, which means there's no collaboration, right? But a lot of the many conservation papers actually do have multiple countries involved, multiple collaborating countries involved. And last but not least, we looked at keyword matches. So really look at the top keywords or the top keywords based on the publication, making sure that they actually match the top keywords of all the other countries. Of course, if the match is perfect, it goes to show that the research is actually quite current. If the match is not, only partial, it goes to show that the research is actually there's a bit of a mismatch in terms of the research effort. So through these 6 indicators, we managed to sort of come up with results, interesting results. Again, this is a sort of a diagrammatic figure where we sort of outline the whole process of how we actually downloaded the data, and then we filtered the data, and then we sort of assign different, or rather we start to collate the different data. For example, the number of authors, the number of countries, or the number of papers in each country based on first author publication, based on the collaborating countries, and some of the other indicators that we actually have. So this is a little bit into some of the details that we actually have. So for instance, like I said, because the methodology here is quite crucial. Here if you look at the diagram on the left, the figure on the left, the first part, it says there are 4 articles, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, and you have the author country, which is between 1 to 3, right? The color different of the different colored flags actually means different country, different author countries. And we have, if you looked at this, what we actually see, the data they actually get out from this is that, okay, the number of publication, the green flag, we have 2. And the red flag, we have actually 1, right? And the number of first authored publication, roughly, we have 2 for green flag and then 0 for red flag, right? And Again, we are looking at the order of the flags, right, on the left side, right, and we have the number of collaborating countries. We can see, right, in some, when you start to sum them up, you start to sort of compute the numbers. We start to see that, okay, there's three green collaborated with 3 other countries, and then so on and so forth. So we have all this calculation, right? So it goes in, and we were also interested in research location. We wanted to know where the research was carrying out, right? You could have this situation where, it's actually quite common, where in the very, very early days, we have you know, the more predominantly, or rather certain countries actually carry out their research in other parts of the world as opposed to their own country, right? Which is normal in the early days, right? But we wanted to see if there's a change in this trend, because I think this also reflects on the conservation research capacity that we're actually interested in. Not to mention local publication on-site. These are the variables that were derived from it, and of course the number of keywords. So by and large, we use 6 of these key indicators to tell our stories. So this is the first bit of the results that we actually have. We look at the status and the trends of CRC, or the conservation research capacity, CRC in short, for countries, for 193 countries. You know, it's a very interesting results. And on the top left, we have the in panel A, we have a global map, and it has 5 colors. And we call them echelon 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, really 5 different levels of publication numbers. This is how we sort of tease them apart. You can see that the red color represents echelon 1, which basically means that they have really high numbers of publication. And if you looked at the bottom panel B, you can see that since 2005, every 5 years we sort of tally the numbers, and there's this growing trend, right? There's this growing trend. The y-axis looks at the number of publication, and this is log transformed. So so the numbers are actually pretty huge, right? So so we have the number of publications per year. So we looked at the growth rate, and the countries in the echelon 1, which is red in color, we have a growth rate of roughly about 81. Mean number of publication per year is about 81 papers per year, right? And if you looked at the countries that are in the echelon 5, which is the lowest echelon, it is basically a flat line. You could see like the dark blue right here, echelon 5, which is at the bottom here, basically less than 1 paper a year. In fact, you know, for the growth rate, we are talking about the growth rate, yeah, and the same, also very low for echelon 4. And you can see that most of these countries are actually in Africa, and of course you have some countries actually do well, do better. Some continents actually do better, but in fact we see that there's we have some countries that are in echelon 1s, echelon 1, echelon 2, and basically echelon 3 onwards, 3, 4, 5, they're not doing so well, yeah, if we look at the growth trend. And if we actually track the numbers and based on their ranking, or we track their ranking over time, we start from their 5 essentially 1, 2, 3, 4 periods over 20 years. In 2001, 2005, we have their beginning ranking, and then we have the 2020, we have their end ranking in this last 20 years. We can see that, for example, USA, United States of America, they tend to have very high ranking. So on the y-axis, you have the top ranking, means the first position, most number of publications. United States of America has been like that since 2001, right? But if you look at China, for instance, China has got was actually in the second echelon level, echelon 2 level, in 2001. They have a lot of numbers of papers, but they are not that many. It's actually at least a fold difference. So over time, I think you start to see this rapid increase in the number for China, which is I think it's second right now, and you can see that, you know, Australia also. The reason why we had about 18 countries, we are sort of like targeted or highlighted them is because these 18 countries are globally known as the mega biodiversity region. country. So they tend to have extreme levels or very high level, one of the highest levels of biodiversity is recognized globally. So, but if you look at their trend, most of them are actually in the third and the fourth echelon. Which is not really good news. Some of them actually have decreasing rank over time, which is not very good. So these are the reason why we had to look at change or trends. So for a quick conclusion at this point, what we want to show here is that we have this global variation in terms of CRC, right? But the disparity between the top, which is the first, and the bottom, which is the fifth echelon, it got larger and larger over time, right? It didn't converge. In fact, it just grows wider and wider. So this is sort of like the income disparity that we actually see. It's quite similar. So in other words, the countries that are doing well are doing even better, right, over time, whereas the country that are not doing well to begin with continue not to do well over time. So this is actually quite worrying. So the question now is that, can we really understand or trust our data, right? Can we actually look at, is it just papers that we're interested in? We are interested in papers, but we are also interested in some of the other independent assessment in terms of how well countries do, right? So we use two indicators. One is looking at the nature index, which is developed by a third party. The other is actually looking at the Species Survival Commission, the chairs and the co-chairs, their identity. So what we saw is that broadly we have this trend where the nature index is actually correlated to the number of publication, which is our measure for different echelon, and you can see that there's this very steady increase over time, right? Or this two the close association between the two indices to measure. And if we looked at the number of co-chairs and chairs, because each SSC, which is part of the IUCN, the species survival, is sort of we looked at it as a very broad measure of species conservation leadership. What we see is that there are some countries actually they have a lot more representatives than they should in terms of their publication. For instance, if you looked at the USA, for example, is way above everybody else, and there are in a lot of experts from US actually are in many of the species survival commission, whereas for example experts in Brazil are actually in much lower than expected or than desired number of SSC. So hopefully future SSC could take this into consideration, because I think they will give them, it will give many of these countries that are in the lower echelon a much bigger voice if they were to actually be chairs or co-chairs in these committees, right? So then the next question is, so what if you have low or high CRC? Does it actually affect your biodiversity conservation? This was something that was quite interesting as we think about, how to do this, because if you really think about what we could globally evaluate or measure, use as a response measure for biodiversity conservation outcome, I think the only viable candidate is actually the Red List Index, because of, I think, at least two reasons. One is that there are nationally representative lists that we could use. Number two, it was something that was collected over time. So that would sort of fulfill our criteria. So we wanted to look at the change. So essentially, we compiled this Red List Index for many countries over this similar 20 years period. So we actually did a very simple regression analysis. And the way we look at this this plot is that we first divided all the countries into two big groups. One is countries with high research capacity. The other is countries with low research capacity. And we accounted for many of the other variables that could come and influence our outcome, right? So what we are really interested in is the effect of CRC, right? So basically, we want to see CRC here, which is here, the first one, right? If it's to the right of this dashed line, it means that it actually has a positive effect in biodiversity conservation. That means the Red List Index is doing better or growing over time. It's doing better. So we want to see this positive effect, right? So the idea that CRC is actually important is actually quite substantiated for the countries with high CRC, right? So which is about 64, then we tend to see this trend. Right, if you look at this, of the 1, 2, 3, 4, right, 4 indicators, they all have very positive, or rather have a positive value, positive coefficient, right? We don't really have to, we can ignore the rest of the variables, because those are more or less the control variables, right? But we wouldn't have too much time to dive into some of the detail. On the other hand, if we looked at how CRC actually affected our countries that actually have low CRC capacity, we only see that there's only one positive influence of a particular CRC, which is the collaborating country outcome or indicator that shows that in general, for countries that have low CRC, having a growing number of collaborating countries actually helps to promote the Red List Index growth. That means it gets better over time. So it goes to show how critical collaborations are for many of these developing countries that actually have low CRC, right? And most of the time they are quite correlated. So the conclusion here is that while most of the CRC indicators improve biodiversity conservation status, essentially we are talking about the Red List Index, but this is only possible in countries with high research capacity, right? And what we have for the low CRC is that we actually only find number of collaborating countries having a positive impact on the biodiversity conservation, here measured by the IUCN Red List, the Red List Index for countries that actually have low CRC. So this is a really key finding that we actually have. So to sum up, what we came to conclusion is that, okay, you really need to build up this conservation research capacity. Otherwise, it will be a huge issue for future biodiversity conservation, right? And in particular, we need the countries with the high CRC, for example, the US, the China, the Australias, they and the UK, they have to actually lend a much greater support for low CRC countries. But the nature of the collaboration has to be meaningful. You know, it's not just you know, doing what you want, but rather doing what the collaborating country actually needs to do. And it's not just giving pure funding, right? Giving just funding. It's not just the funding, but actually coming up with truly collaborative research that would be more meaningful and more useful for many of these low CRC developing countries. And this would then go hand in hand with some of our SDGs and of course our Target 20 in order to realize this whole global effort to protect the biodiversity, not just in the country, but rather in the entire planet. So this is, I'll leave this last slide up here, which is a really nice little summary that we actually have at the beginning of the paper, and it gives a really 4 key highlights of our research, and I would just go through it really quickly. So we find that conservation research capacity differs greatly among countries. Disparity in this global CRC is growing. CRC actually does have a positive effect on biodiversity conservation as measured by our Red List Index. And last but not least, we do find that different aspects of CRC, they are effective for countries with high and with low CRC. With that, I will end my talk. This is just a short advertisement, like what Himza did at the beginning. He was advertising for integrative conservation. Here I am. Also advertising for our group. Anybody who's interested should get in touch, or doing a postdoc, or coming and graduate students, or coming some kind of meaningful collaboration. Do get in touch, and you can email me using this. sending emails to me. And I think I'll end my talk here, and I'm happy to take questions, Ahimsa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tien Ming. It has been a really, really interesting and enjoyable presentation. So then for the audience, what we can do is I will make a couple of questions to Tien Ming, and then we will open for questions from the floor. So those of you in Zoom who want to make any questions, please click the upper hand, and then I will call you to turn on your camera and your microphone, and you can make the question yourself. For those of you who are in co-share or in Xiaoitong, you can also type your questions on the chat box, and someone will read the questions loud here for Professor Lee. So, Tien, just I think this is a very important study, and I think one of the tenets that we have had in conservation biology for decades is the idea that research capacity. So two things. One is that research helps conservation, and the second one is that local research capacity improves conservation outcomes. And this was something that we have basically trusted in our gut feeling, because there was not much evidence, and something that I have personally looked for evidence, and I found a lot of indirect suggestions, but really there hasn't been a proper assessment. So I think this paper is important in establishing a first solid evaluation of these relationships. So it's very nice to see that there are some links, and that some links that we can understand based on the context of the country and different dimensions. So then, congratulations for that work. Something also that I felt based on the results is a sense of optimism, because you divide the countries into high capacity and low capacity, but from a just very rapid assessment, they don't seem to be very strongly correlated. Maybe they're correlated, but not as much as I was expecting in terms of income. Maybe there, or in terms of a GDP, but the thing is that I can see many of the mega diverse countries being in the second category, in the second echelon. There are some in the first echelon. There are many mega diverse countries, but they are the usual suspects. Australia, US, China, but I'm very pleased to see countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, Colombia, India, South Africa, Mexico, in that second pool of countries, which seems, because those are countries where conservation is really, really important. So I think that's a sign of optimism. And then I think the point is how to improve situations probably in the third and fourth echelon. I guess the fifth echelon are countries that have two big problems that are probably more urgent than conservation in general. Probably many of them are failed states or countries with severe problems, but how we can improve the situation in the third and fourth categories. And it was very, very good to see that what works and what is needed in different categories is different, so that allows to be more specific with policies and with approaches, right? And it's interesting that only collaboration was significant in the lower groups. So I want to ask you, what is your take on the recent kind of intense discussion about helicopter science and what is helicopter science, and how we can do good collaboration and how we should not do collaboration in this context?
Right, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay. It's a very interesting, very important question. I think first and foremost, what I want to say is that if you remove conservation from conservation research capacity, essentially it's actually research capacity. It's broadly relevant to every other field that we are in, right? So actually the solution is everywhere. You know, like how a country becomes, for example, a developing country, how a developing country becomes a developed country, essentially, you know, there are some trademarks, there are some ways to do it. And the idea here is really how do you grow research capacity in a country, right? And there's no doubt that, you know, helicopter science is getting a lot of pushback, right? And you have to know this is already what 2023, and people are getting less and less drawn towards the idea of helicopter science, or rather the effectiveness of helicopter science. If you think about it, or helicopter economy, whatever it is, right? It does not fly in the long run. It does not help the local country, right? So from the local country perspective, I think you got to be thinking long term. You got to be thinking that, okay, if you want to come to my country to do research, right? And then some of the countries do that. For example, Indonesia, right? Indonesia, where I actually have some, I did my fieldwork, some of my fieldwork there. You could see that they have actually quite strict requirements in terms of collaboration, right? They have this whole process that you actually have to fulfill, right? They are actually protecting their resources, right? Like many other countries should. So it's actually really part of, you know, the negotiation process, and really if they could actually have a playbook that says, okay, you know what, this is how we should do it, right? This is how we should enter this partnership, right? If we will allow you to come in, right, and work on our land, do research, you know, but you have to train our students, you have to train our staff, you have to do whatever. So I think there has to be some kind of partnership that goes along with the whole idea of collaborative science, because helicopter science, I mean, used to fly in the past, partly because there isn't too much pushback. But right now, I think more and more countries are recognizing the issues of such, you know, such way of doing science. So I think it's the responsibility of the local government, local country, to actually come up with ways to negate or to discourage helicopter science. And I think this has to sort of go both ways. So one way is that we cannot be pushing helicopter science, and the other way is that the receiving country or the local country, the host, cannot be endorsing or supportive of helicopter science. They have to be thinking, you know, for themselves in the long run.
Yeah, I think maybe one of the problems with the discussion is that people understand a bit different where the boundaries of helicopter science. So what can you define what is helicopter science? You know, what are we talking about helicopter science?
Yeah, my idea, and again, I think helicopter science, the way I understand this is really helicopter science or parachuting science. I don't know. I think it's quite similar. So the idea is really foreign scientists would come into the country, would basically parachute in and then do their research and actually leave. Is that what it is? This is my idea of what helicopter science is. Yeah. So they are not really in it for the long run.
Then you go,
yeah. They will just take the data and then just heli evac, right? Heli evacuation. Just take the data and go, right? So again, this goes back to, you know, data resources being IPs. And I think you need to sort of respect that boundary, right? I think that is something that will I mean, people will more and more, you know, there will be more and more discussions about you know, how to get it right, and I think there's this growing I guess need to get this straight.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I think we will open for questions from the floor. If people have any question in Zoom, please raise your hand, and I will call you so you can turn on your camera and your microphone. So then we'll wait for questions, maybe another question. So then I was thinking also about the Red List Index, that there could be some correlation between positive trends in the Red List Index that are not caused by proactive conservation, you know, that things could be improving just by other mega trends. Okay, so I'm thinking about Europe, for example. In Europe, many indicators are improving because of a number of things: urbanization, people, you know, leaving more space for nature. You have restoration, and you have many species coming back and growing in numbers. So, of course, there is surely some influence of active conservation. But I suspect that even if there was no such active conservation, many things will be improving nonetheless, because as a consequence of other trends.
Right.
So, do you think that could be a factor there?
Yeah. Yes, I think so. I mean, I have to say yes. Because I think you know, like all research, it would be suicidal to say no, in part because I think many of the variables, I mean, we accounted for some of the variables that you sort of talk about, like GDP, you know, protected area coverage, as you see in here. We try to account for it, and, you know, we try to make sure that, you know, even after accounting for some of the more prominent factors, you know, we still see a signal, not the strongest one, right? Not the strongest signal, but we still see some signal, some influence of this, you know, this CRC indicators. So that is our first, I guess, our evidence that, you know, perhaps research capacity actually have an influence on Red List Index. But to say for sure, I think it's going to be really, really hard. I mean, they are correlational for sure, because you know, it's just impossible to show this really, really direct evidence, and not at the global level for sure, but at the local level, I think it could be possible. It could be possible, but it's going to take a lot of effort to demonstrate that research capacity is actually important. I mean, it is something that is quite obvious, but nobody actually looks at it, partly because everybody assumed that it works, right? But I think the question is, the question to us actually is more along the lines of, you know, how best can we make this work? So it's good to have, for example, if you are publishing 100 papers a year, right? Of course, you know, over time, you know, whatever will get better, right? Like you said, right? Because the entire environment is getting better. The problem is, you know, why do we have to publish 100? Why can't we just publish 10 solid papers that looks at big, it has a much bigger impact, right? Why is number more important than, say, for example, the quality of the research, you know, whether is it policy oriented or not, right? These are the details that we didn't have the space to actually get into. In fact, we didn't even look at it. We didn't even look at, you know, one thing that would be really interesting is actually looked at. Of course, anybody could do this, but the idea here is that, you know, is there a pathway in which you could build into your research program, right? In training people to tackle the right issues so that, you know, your Red List Index or whatever your index is could grow much quicker, or could improve much quicker, right, over time. Right, because we are always looking for effectiveness. We are always looking for effectiveness, which in effect, you know, for the most part, most things are not really that effective anyway. So, but we are constantly striving for effectiveness. So now the question is, you know, what is the effective solution, right? If we were to publish 100 papers, right, what would that 100 papers be? What should it focus on, right? Should we do all elephants, for example? Would elephant, you know, your research, would it actually, you know, of course, I'm using elephant because you're my host, right? But it could be anything else, right? It could be anything else. Doesn't matter. But can we actually show that if you focus on a certain species or certain ecoregion or certain, you know, ecosystem, it would actually have more tangible effect on our effort to improve biodiversity conservation? I think that is the real question.
Yeah, as someone who has been a lecturer for many years, I always assume that having more people trained in conservation science, having more people doing degrees in environmental science or conservation, master's degrees, PhD degrees, kind of cascade down into society, having more people at governments, at the ministry level, at local level, in consultancy firms, in NGOs, understanding science and making better judgments and better informed decisions, which should lead to better policies and better implementation, better outcomes. So I would love to be able to see how is this relationship? Is this relationship real, and into what scale, and where, you know, how to reinforce this connection between science and conservation? But we have a question from Zoom from Ifu Wang, and Ifu is asking, can you do a little bit more detail into how Indonesian government protect their IP research resources? Some positive examples that are practiced in real life.
Yes. So my experience, and this was maybe about 10 years ago, I think. I'm not sure if it changed. It could have changed, but I haven't had the chance to go back now. But I think in general, what they do is they would you have to find a willing collaborative institution who basically follows you and approves and are willing to support your specific research proposal. And so in other words, you need to get a sponsor, a local sponsor. And you got to make sure that, okay, you need to turn in reports. For example, midterm reports, and of course, you have one of those. Once you finish your project, you need to have a summary report. And we would also have to have them on our papers when we publish them, or they would insist that we will have. They would be on it, and they would basically facilitate everything. So in other words, it's from the looks of it, it makes it hard, difficult, challenging to do helicopter science, because coming in, like you'll be coming into the country and you need a research permit, right? Before they give you a research permit, and you got to go through multiple institutions or multiple ministries to actually get it. I mean, the process is actually not that streamlined. When I was there, it was a huge hassle. But in a way, it tells you the importance of actually, taking local people, local government into consideration when you do your research. But it works out in the end, right? It makes you. It allows you to sort of like take people more seriously, and essentially, you're not just there for the science, right? You're also there for the collaboration. You're also there for the partnership. And what we did, it was that we had this really good model where we worked with this scientist, this partner, for a long time, until she actually retired a few years ago. So every time we need to go to Indonesia to do certain stuff, we would contact her. And because there's this established relationship, it became quite easy, or at least we know how to go about making this collaboration work. And it was actually quite smooth sailing, and essentially we actually published a lot of papers together. So it was a very, very fruitful collaboration.
Would you recommend more countries to adopt these policies as a formal policy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think to me, I think it's just common sense, right? It's just that you have to protect your IP, right? You have to protect your IP, and you want to make sure that your people benefit from it, right? I mean, it's all about this is the way that you would sort of like speed up the entire transition, right? Just learning, or rather becoming expert by learning, right? And there's nothing better than working together or being part of a team, with a really established research team that know what they are doing. Essentially, you're just learning the ropes from the best people out there, essentially. So you want to be able to do that from a country's perspective, from a research agency's perspective. So if people are willing to come, right, you got to make sure that, okay, you got to have the terms and conditions for people to actually work. And I say this from both having experience as the working in developed countries, as well as spending time in developing countries, in the perspective of actually both. I mean, from a very global perspective, you got to be thinking of how best to make sure that everybody benefits from the arrangement. And right now, there's a lot of disparity in that, which probably leads to many of the failed. I mean, this is just one thing, right? But then a lot, it's actually largely because of disparity that a lot of negotiations have actually failed, right? So it's the same thing. So, but there is no true, or rather, it's impossible. Everybody's on the same page on everything. But you need to find out what's best for your country. And without knowledge of all this, what you have, it's very hard to know what you need or what you have to defend. So I think this goes to show. I mean, we have really good partnerships with ASEAN country. I mean, I'm from ASEAN. Singapore is part of ASEAN. China-ASEAN relationship is good. And there's a lot of collaboration, or a growing number of collaborations between the two regions, or rather the country and the region. So many of this relationship will blossom over time. And I think there's also a need to sort of I don't know if this is a really good word, but to bundle economic development with scientific development. I think they should go in tandem, right? Because that's how you sort of reinforce partnership, right? And if you can do that, I think not just the society, not just the economy, I think the science development will also improve over time. And I'm not just saying China and ASEAN, but I'm saying, you know, everybody with everybody else. If you can form such partnership, I think that would be really valuable. And one way to look at it is, you know, tie the economic development structure with the scientific development structure. So wrap it together. I mean, couple it, you know, in the sense that we are decoupling, but you know, you also want to couple it in the right way. You want to recouple in the right way.
Yeah, I would like to encourage people in Zoom, if they want to make any question, Dr. Tien Ming, Kyle, Dosa, please, we'll be happy to hear from you. So then I was wondering, do you still see many papers where you have pure helicopter science, where you have, you know, a paper conducted in Indonesia with researchers only from the UK and from the US? It has been a long time since I have seen those extreme cases.
I'll tell you, the short answer is no. But the long answer is that I have to look at my data. I think it's interesting. You know how this is actually quite interesting. And I'll talk about this. You know how in the beginning we talk about this paper, right? This paper that we published in this paper. If you looked at it, we have 4 authors on this paper. And initially we actually were thinking, you know, should we actually get someone else who's not working in China to contribute, right? And you know, to be honest, I was really against the idea. I was like, you know, let's just make sure that this is a made in China thing, right? Because this is about China. So I'm pretty sure over time, you know, there will be a time where, you know, many of these countries in the lower echelon, they will start to, you know, be able to publish, you know, high quality papers about their countries. But there's a process to that. You know, we didn't see the CRC in China, or rather, we didn't really expect it 20 years ago. But I think there will be a good chance that, you know, many of the lower echelon countries would come up if we have really good collaborative structure in place. And I see that with the GBF. I mean, the GBF sort of encourages this. So in the next 20 years, perhaps if we do another evaluation, we'll see this change. But right now, like I said, you know, a lot of decoupling has happened and a lot of recoupling needs to happen. So, you know, science partnership, you know, has to go beyond many of this, you know, decoupling process. And I think, I mean, there's a lot of things that are outside of our control, but you know, for some of the partnership that many of us actually have, both yourself,
okay, I think we are losing Professor Lee. Okay, we just wait until he comes back. Okay, we'll wait a couple of minutes. If he doesn't come back, then we will call it a day. So I will take the chance again to call for papers for integrated conservation if you guys are doing work that can be published in a in a conservation journal and you're looking for an outlet to publish, please consider integrative conservation. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we have a special issue coming on human-wildlife conflict and coexistence. The deadline for submissions will be mid-August. So then please consider submitting the papers. And regarding the future integrative conservation webinars, next month we'll have Nigel Stork giving a talk from Australia. In September, we will have Alessio Perci from the European Commission talking about the economic growth and environmental sustainability. In October, we'll have David Dajian from Hong Kong University talking about freshwater conservation. So then we'll have an interesting program coming up. If you have any question, you can also type your question now. And hopefully Professor Lee will come back soon. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Welcome back. Tien Ming.
I know.
Tien Ming, we okay?
Yep, I'm okay. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Sorry, I don't recall what you were saying, but we can move on. So, do we have any question from the audience? We're talking about these kind of policies to promote having a local host, and I was thinking this reminds me of, if I understand well, the policy that China had implemented with industrial and commercial, activities in China. When foreign companies came to China, they had to have a local partner, and that's a great way to boost things. At the beginning, it's just a matter of partnership. Eventually, you have a lot of things branching out. And something else that I was thinking about is when I think about conservation, because of the local nature of conservation, and Yuton, I will come to you right now. Because of conservation is local, I would say that we don't need, in many of these countries, a good indicator of conservation, good conservation science is not necessarily having papers in Science or Nature, is having a good number of solid science in reputable journals. Could be Q1 or Q2, but in journals where you have decent science addressing local issues, because most of the papers published in these big journals, the top impact will be very global, and maybe it's not so implementable at local level where in these countries. So we have a question. So Yuton Wu, would you like to open your camera and microphone and make your question?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for your sharing. I think the whole paper is really inspiring and contributive. My name is Yuton. I'm a rising sophomore from Massachusetts Institute of Technology in the US. And I'm wondering, because I'm also very interested in wildlife protection in Asia, but I don't think I'm actually going to get to like biology or to do that. My major might be computer science. So in this case, what kind of suggestion would you give to probably university students from liberal arts background? What kind of skills in specific would you suggest them to learn or get hands-on starting from now if they want to get into wildlife conservation? And what does the work actually include? Because unfortunately, I haven't had any hands-on experience conservation like this. Thank you so much.
Right. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. This is a very important question. This is a very important question. I mean, it is a, the way I think about this is that we are here essentially to find solutions. It doesn't matter what discipline you are in. I mean, the discipline or the knowledge you actually have will accumulate over time, right? It is how you find that solution, the process of finding the solution. I mean, it could be the case where we need someone from computer science major with computer science background to design something, for example, to use AI to provide a solution. You know, it may be that way. I mean, in fact, I'm working with a lot of you know, non-conservation related discipline people, essentially researchers, to solve a problem or to solve problems. Right, you know, I'm working with, say, somebody who works on text mining, and you know, just trying to analyze large volumes of text. Right, there's some simple questions. For example, we are interested in knowing, say, you know, the current sentiments of the public on certain issues. For example, carbon neutrality goals. Right, what do people know about this? We're trying to understand the connections of the public. You know, what do they know about this? Right, so you know where they are with these issues, and these are the things that probably somebody who does conservation science or environmental science protection, essentially, or climate change research, I mean, they all are interested in. But yet, you know, you would probably need somebody with a really, really broad background to get into all these issues, or for that matter, biodiversity connection, if there's such a thing. And I think there is, because we're actually doing research on that. Because the idea here is that, you know, we are always trying to find solutions. We are solving problems. And the thing about solving problems is that there is no handbook of solutions. You know, you have to come up with the solutions. You know, going to MIT, you probably know, right? Engineering background for the most part. If you want to do conservation, do wildlife protection, MIT is probably not the first place I would look for, say, a trainee or a student, right?
Yeah.
Because you guys are not the first choice, right? But you know, it probably doesn't matter, because there will be too many of engineers like yourself that you will start to actually look for jobs outside of engineering or computer science by the time you graduate, which is 2026, and then you'll be looking for related things to do, ideas to do, and it's about using what you learn to solve what you need. And I think this is the more interesting bit, because my own personal story is that I started off doing conservation biology, you know, very broadly, probably around the same time as Ahimsa, because I think we are roughly around the same age, I think. You know, but then I realized that, okay, look, you know, I'm not really solving anything. I'm not really, you know, addressing any of the problems that we have, you know. Then I started, oh, maybe the problem is with human, right? This is where I sort of got into the whole social thing, right? I mean, with the elephants, the same thing, right? It's not entirely the elephant's problem, right? It's mostly the human's problem. But how do you solve the problem with the human? You need to know social science, right? And people who work on computer science, yes, they do. They start to understand a lot more about social science. Beginning, right? And I think you might not have enough anyway. So at least now for my students, you know, I encourage them to sort of look beyond the physical sciences, right? Because we tend to divide ourselves into really, really structured and unnecessary silo. Right, so you are a physical scientist, you are a social scientist, and blah blah blah. But the idea is, yes, it improves efficiency in developing solutions, right? But the question is that the more you are in it, right, you start to specialize, the less you are willing to talk to people across the boundary, across silos. And this is the problem. We are so specialized now that we hate talking to somebody, for example, in the computer science, because these people don't know our language, right? But it is because we are pursuing specialization to improve efficiency, which is why we have discipline, right? But if you think about it, right, the original philosophers, they don't really have boundaries, right? They just think about a problem. They think about how to solve a problem, right? Partly because maybe they have a lot of time, right? We don't. But my point here is that it's never about what your background is.
Yeah, I really do appreciate that, because I'm actually a big fan of interdisciplinary study, and I'm actually trying to double major in political science. But the thing I'm wondering about getting a job or like internship in China is that I don't know, like, would the system really like kind of like recognize me if I've been like working on like other like like what kind of like internship or experience should I be looking for at this point with my like interdisciplinary background? Or like, I know that's a really big and personal question, but thank you so much for the answer.
Yeah, always go with a problem.
Okay.
You'll not go wrong with a problem. Yeah, always go with a problem, and then you'll find who are the best people working on the problem, then you go to them.
Okay.
That's it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Don't let the discipline sort of like wrap you up. You know, it becomes, yeah, it just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I would add that engineers are very good at solving problems, right? And often they are looking for problems, and they are so happy to talk with people like us. Every time I interact with engineers, they're excited because they have solutions, but they are missing the problem. And when you tell them this is what I need, they are very good at focusing and seeing. So engineering mindset might not always work for the complex problems we're dealing with. Okay, because we're dealing with very, very complex, multi-dimensional problems. But there are many places where it really work very well. I think China is a good example of how engineering is penetrating very well into wildlife monitoring, data management, kind of automatizing a lot of the data collection processes that allow to have much more information to understand systems and to make decisions. So it's very exciting what is happening. And this is a webinar hosted by Integrative Conservation. The name of the journal was very, very intentional, trying to say that this is about integrating all these messy disciplines, because conservation, it requires understanding natural systems, but it will not be fixed. It will not be addressed successfully just by understanding natural systems. It's going to be dealing with the socioecological interface, where we really will be to be successful at preventing biodiversity loss and promoting conservation. So, do we have any more questions from the audience? If not, I think we will leave it here. Tien Ming, has been a really, really enjoyable talk. I found it very interesting, very well done. I think it's very important work, and I think it opens to a lot of follow-up research from your group and from many other groups, and I'm sure we'll take the follow from here. Thanks a lot, and just reminding everyone that the next month, the first Tuesday of July, the first Tuesday of August, we have Nigel Stork giving a talk, and then looking forward to see you then. Tien Ming, just to tell you, today we had around 1,350 people following online, so very big audience, and
wow,
everyone enjoyed a lot. Yeah.
It's my pleasure. I'm happy to do it again if you need me, Ahimsa.
We will call you, definitely. Yeah, it's
all right.
Really,
thank
really
you.
Enjoyable. Okay, thank you very much.
I'll
Thank
see you
everyone.
soon. Yeah, bye.
Bye bye.